My wife was almost shot because of the height of our grass. It wasn't about politics or crime. It was simply about our lawn. Welcome to Meadowbrook, where the president of the Homeowners Association behaves like a self-appointed magistrate armed with a measuring tape. We moved here to raise our cattle, mend fences, and savor the tranquility. What we received instead were threats, financial penalties, and a clipboard-wielding adversary named Candace, who approached lawn maintenance with the gravity of a national security issue. A dispute that began with a minor citation escalated into a confrontation so unbelievable, you doubted if I hadn't experienced it myself. It turns out you never really understand your spouse until a police officer appears in your barn. If you've ever contended with HOA insanity, I invite you to share your experience. I suspect things can get quite strange. After completing 2 tours in Iraq, I felt I had secured the right to spend my remaining years in tranquility on property I had developed with my own 2 hands. Meadowbrook Ranch in Alabama was more than just 20 acres with a few head of cattle. It was my piece of liberty, earned through sacrifice and funded by my military retirement. Kelly had fully embraced this dream as well, transforming our barn into a modest fitness studio where she assisted local women in maintaining their strength. We were not disturbing anyone or requesting anything beyond the fundamental right to live on our own land. Our life was the very thing I had fought for overseas: peaceful, orderly, and devoid of individuals attempting to micromanage every facet of our lives. That serene existence endured for precisely 4 months, until the day we stepped into the Piggly Wiggly and had our first encounter with a genuine neighbor. I noticed her before Kelly did. A woman dressed in a spotless white blazer was positioned near the produce, but her focus was not on the vegetables. She was observing my wife with such a concentrated gaze that my ingrained combat senses began to stir. "Pardon me," she stated, her voice possessing that distinct southern sweetness that often conceals a sharp edge. "Are you the new residents at the old Henderson property?" Kelly composed herself, offering her polite smile reserved for strangers. "Yes, ma'am, that's correct. I'm Kelly Hayes, and this is my husband, Brad." The woman's eyes narrowed, scrutinizing Kelly's face as though examining fine print. "Well, I'm Candace Monroe, the president of the Meadowbrook Homeowners Association. I trust you both intend to uphold the property standards we have diligently established here." There was something in her delivery of property standards that set my teeth on edge, but Kelly simply gave a pleasant nod. "Of course. We are just unassuming people hoping to live peacefully with our cattle." The word cattle seemed to offend Candace personally. I saw Kelly's shoulders grow slightly taut as she perceived the flicker of revulsion in Candace's look, yet my wife's expression stayed perfectly composed. She had learned long ago to avoid reacting to provocation, a discipline that would become more crucial than either of us could have imagined. "Cattle," Candace reiterated, taking out her phone to make a visible note right in our presence. "How rustic." The manner in which she articulated rustic made it sound like an infectious ailment. She looked up again, that disingenuous smile stretched tautly across her face. "Well, I am certain we will be in contact very soon. The HOA regards community standards with utmost seriousness here at Meadowbrook." As she walked away with a click of her heels, Kelly faced me, her features showing clear confusion. "Did that encounter seem personal to you?" she asked in a low voice. I nodded, observing Candace's silhouette in the glass of the store window as she paused near the exit, continuing to watch us like a predator assessing its potential prey. 3 days later, Candace materialized at our front gate, attired as if she were ready to seize a national treasure. The white blazer had been replaced by a complete power suit, accessorized with dark sunglasses and a clipboard sturdy enough to deflect minor projectiles. As she stood there, with our placid cattle grazing in the background, she resembled a corporate lawyer who had mistakenly wandered into rural America. "Mr. and Mrs. Hayes," she declared without any introduction, "I am here to perform the required new resident compliance review." Neither of us could recall consenting to any such review, but Candace was already striding across our land as if she held the deed to every single blade of grass. For the following hour, she used a ruler to measure the grass and tallied our cattle as if each one represented a personal affront to her concept of suburban flawlessness. Upon finishing, she handed us a 3-page document of infractions that was tantamount to a declaration of war on practical sense. "Livestock visible from the roadway. Grass is half an inch above the specified height," she proclaimed, her tone saturated with moral certitude. Each violation was more absurd than the one before it, yet Candace presented them with the solemnity of a Supreme Court justice delivering capital sentences. Kelly took a step forward, and I saw her posture change to one of greater alertness and focus. "Ma'am, We examined the HOA regulations before we bought the property. There are no clauses regarding livestock limitations on properties exceeding 10 acres. Candace's smile was so cold it could have chilled the underworld. The regulations are subject to change, my dear. It is imperative that community standards are upheld. You have a period of 30 days to rectify these matters, or we will have no choice but to proceed with further measures. As she returned to her immaculate white SUV, Kelly stood unmoving, observing every one of her movements with the kind of focused vigilance I had witnessed in soldiers monitoring enemy activity. "Brad," she said softly, "that woman was not conducting a review. She was constructing a case." I observed my wife's face, detecting an expression I hadn't seen before. It wasn't apprehension or rage, but a form of deliberate evaluation that indicated Kelly was already several steps ahead in a contest I had yet to comprehend. When Candace left that day, she believed she had issued a final demand to some defenseless country folk. She was completely unaware that she had just initiated hostilities with an individual who had dedicated years to teaching others how to overcome conflicts far more perilous than HOA disputes. That evening, as Kelly paced in our kitchen, scrutinizing HOA papers with the concentration of an attorney readying for a major trial, I couldn't escape the premonition that our tranquil country existence was on the verge of becoming exceedingly complex. The following day, I learned what suburban psychological warfare entails when waged by an individual with an excess of time and a deficit of judgment. Candace had evidently concluded that our property required ceaseless monitoring, as she began to materialize everywhere with the tenacity of a tax audit, but with double the animosity. She was present at the mailbox each morning during Kelly's jog, perpetually observing. Subsequently, there were encounters at every public venue in town. Each instance involved Candace, armed with her clipboard and camera, chronicling our lives as if we were participants in some bizarre behavioral experiment. However, this is the detail that truly captured my focus. Her surveillance was not distributed evenly between us. Every observation session was intensely directed at Kelly, following my wife's actions with the commitment of a private detective on a case of marital infidelity. When Kelly was hanging clothes to dry or working in our small vegetable patch, Candace would be positioned across the road, using actual binoculars to observe my wife's every move as if attempting to unravel a personal enigma. "Honey," I remarked one afternoon as we saw Candace trying to photograph our cattle from behind a stop sign, "I'm beginning to suspect this is far beyond typical HOA eccentricity." Kelly drew the kitchen curtain she had been observing through and faced me with that now common expression of meticulous assessment. "She isn't just gathering proof of property infractions, Brad. Her focus is on me, how I move. My destinations, my daily schedule. That is not the conduct of a homeowners association. It's something far more intimate." The way Kelly spoke, with that trace of professional acknowledgement in her voice, made me question, not for the first time, what my wife's occupation had been before we met. Her tone contained a quality that implied she had faced this type of focused observation previously and was familiar with the appropriate response. Kelly's countermove was a brilliant display of courteous accuracy. Rather than engaging Candace in a direct confrontation or worsening the conflict, my wife executed a beautifully strategic action. She composed a formal letter that rectified every spelling and grammatical error in Candace's notices of violation. Kelly had been instructed that discipline starts with each word and phrase, and her reply demonstrated that military-like focus on detail. The letter consisted of 2 pages of meticulous politeness, indicating mistakes such as the incorrect use of your, and that was among the more gentle corrections. "Dear Mrs. Monroe," the letter started, "I appreciate your recent letters concerning property compliance. I have taken the liberty of amending several inaccuracies to promote clearer communication in the future." What came next was a methodical breakdown of Candace's errors, presented with a degree of professional civility that made each correction feel like a mild rebuke. Kelly referenced correct HOA documentation protocols, provided illustrations of proper legal formatting, and recommended that subsequent communications could be improved with fundamental proofreading. It was less of a reply and more of a demonstration in how to professionally embarrass someone while preserving impeccable manners. The impact on Candace was both swift and dramatic. In less than 24 hours, she had advanced to lodging complaints with every municipal department that would entertain them, evidently dedicating her entire evening to finding grounds for an attack that could succeed. Yet, rather than feeling overwhelmed by this new level of aggression, Kelly appeared almost invigorated by it. While I was on the verge of losing my composure from the constant stream of inspectors arriving without notice, my wife was keeping meticulous records that would have earned the admiration of a Pentagon archivist. She took pictures of every exchange, noted precise times and dates, and created a file that detailed not only the events but also the manner in which each official reacted to our willingness to cooperate. Kelly, I remarked one evening, as I observed her arranging yet another file of documentation, how do you possess such extensive knowledge of correct documentation methods? This is not something a typical civilian would know. She raised her head from her documents, her look suggesting a depth to her history that I had yet to probe. You learn certain abilities in structured settings, Brad. At times, life experience prepares you for disputes you wish would never arise. That evening, I found myself observing my wife as she worked, paying attention to specifics I had previously overlooked. The way she arranged data was not haphazard. It adhered to a structure indicative of professional instruction in gathering evidence and constructing cases. Her penmanship was so exact it suggested military training, and her handling of the escalating harassment was strategic rather than reactive. When I called my friend Mike to express my frustration about our HOA troubles, he posed a question that brought me to a halt. Brad, what was Kelly's profession before you two met? I understood with a sense of unease that I had never received a full response to that query, and perhaps it was time that I did. The following morning marked our initial significant clash when I detected loud voices coming from our front yard. As I walked to the front of the house, I saw Kelly positioned calmly near our mailbox while Candace was gesticulating frantically with her clipboard, her voice echoing over the property like an alert signal. "You believe you're so clever with your minor grammar corrections," Candace was shouting, her composed exterior at last giving way to unadulterated fury. "But I am well aware of the type of individual you truly are beneath that facade of innocence." Kelly's reply came in a tone so measured it verged on gentle. "Ma'am, I think you might have me mistaken for another person. However, if you wish to talk about actual property matters, I would be glad to go over the HOA regulations with you." The disparity between Candace's frantic state and Kelly's composed demeanor appeared only to worsen the situation, and I observed my wife manage the verbal onslaught with a level of skill that indicated this was not her first hostile exchange. As Candace retreated angrily to her SUV, Kelly stood completely still, watching her departure with a focused gaze that made me understand my wife was collecting information rather than merely witnessing a neighbor's outburst. The crucial information emerged from local chatter and old newspaper records, provided by two women at the feed supply store who were unaware they were helping to solve a puzzle that had been troubling me for weeks. "That Monroe woman is fixated," one of them remarked as I feigned interest in the prices of chicken feed. "She has newspaper articles and all, attempting to show that the military woman is a threat." The reference to newspaper articles sent a shiver down my spine, as it implied Candace's actions against Kelly were rooted in something concrete, not just general HOA overreach. "My cousin is employed at the city hall," the second woman added, and she mentioned that Candace has been visiting daily, sifting through old files concerning a training incident that occurred 5 years ago. A training incident. Those words struck me with the force of a physical impact as the elements of a puzzle I hadn't even realized existed began to fall into place. Upon returning home, I discovered Kelly at the kitchen table, surrounded by her customary collection of documents. But this time was different. Today, she was gazing at an old newspaper clipping with a look I had never witnessed before, not one of fear, but of acknowledgement combined with what seemed to be the burden of past choices catching up with her. "Kelly," I said, placing the feed sacks down with hands that were not entirely stable. "Are you all right?" She looked up at me, her eyes containing the answers to questions I had hesitated to ask. "Brad, I believe I understand why Candace detests me. I have something to show you from 5 years ago." She rotated the newspaper so I could see the headline that would clarify everything. "Local woman injured in military training exercise." The report was concise, consisting of only a few paragraphs about a young woman named Rachel Monroe who had sustained an injury during a Navy training program. The injury had cut short her military career before it had truly begun. And at the end, almost as a side note, was a statement that made everything fall into place. Instructor K. Hayes chose not to provide details on the particular event. I shifted my gaze from the newspaper to my wife's face and then back, a wave of comprehension washing over me like icy water. "Hayes. Kelly Hayes, this was you?" She gave a slow nod, her voice heavy with the gravity of a choice that had troubled her for years. Rachel Monroe. I recall her now. I now saw why my wife never discussed past assignments. A true professional seldom boasts of triumphs that incurred such a high personal price. Kelly's account was straightforward and resolute. Rachel violated safety protocols during a nighttime water drill. She almost caused someone's death. I washed her out. It ended her career, but it prevented loss of life. The manner in which she spoke, devoid of self-pity or attempts to rationalize, revealed to me the true character of my wife. She had faced an incredibly difficult decision, choosing between the ambitions of one person and the well-being of others. She had opted to safeguard the group, thereby earning a permanent adversary. Her sister, Candace, has never pardoned me for terminating Rachel's military ambitions, Kelly went on, her fingertips lightly touching the margin of the newspaper clipping. The burden of that choice, safeguarding future military personnel at the expense of one family's aspirations, was etched on my wife's face like a scar that had never completely faded. What was most striking to me was how Kelly had managed that dire situation by herself, making a choice that protected lives while dashing ambitions, and subsequently shouldering the professional and personal repercussions without a word of protest. The newspaper clipping alluded to the dispute, the family's fury, and the inquiry that eventually supported Kelly's decision, but it failed to convey the individual sacrifice of being correct when that meant creating lasting foes. All at once, the pieces fell into place with a startling and dreadful clarity, as I understood we were not contending with arbitrary HOA interference, but with a calculated act of revenge that had been brewing for 5 years. So when Candace relocated here and identified you, I started, and Kelly completed my sentence. She recognized the person who ended her sister's military path, and she has been plotting retaliation from that moment on. I reflected on all the occasions Kelly had appeared to be shouldering an unseen weight, and I grasped that she had been coping with the awareness that her correct actions had created adversaries who would never forgive her for prioritizing safety over sentiment. The professional judgment that had likely protected multiple lives had spawned a personal vendetta that was now jeopardizing the tranquil existence we had constructed together. Before I could inquire further about that period in Kelly's life, we heard the distinct sound of tires on the gravel of our driveway. Looking through the window, we spotted Candace's white SUV making its way toward us. This time, however, she was not by herself. 2 additional vehicles with an official appearance were trailing her, and my stomach sank as I saw the methodical escalation of someone who had at last put together all the elements of her private vendetta. Kelly rose and approached the window, her actions growing more deliberate and assured with every encounter. She understands, Kelly stated plainly. The unknown now is the extent to which she will escalate matters. As we observed Candace nearing our front door, flanked by what seemed to be a small contingent of officials, I came to the realization that my wife's past had finally overtaken us. And the woman who had devoted years to instructing others on how to navigate impossible circumstances was now poised to confront the repercussions of a choice that had been correct, essential, and entirely unforgivable to the family it had impacted. The peaceful retirement I had earned from my military career was about to transform into a battleground of a different nature. The review that ensued was a form of bureaucratic combat, executed with the exactness of a military operation and the malice of a personal grudge. For a full 3 hours, Candace's crew of officials combed through our property as if they were examining a federal crime scene, discovering infractions that seemed to appear out of nowhere with every new measurement they took. Our barn was said to obstruct the view, and our cows were noted for gathering too near the property line. Yes, it seems cattle can be cited for loitering. Each new citation was more absurd than the previous one, yet it was presented with the gravity of federal agents cataloging risks to national security. During this entire bureaucratic spectacle, Kelly displayed a degree of professional calm that should have been comforting to any competent official. She responded to every inquiry with exactness, asked for duplicates of all recorded measurements, and courteously noted procedural inaccuracies when the reviewers erred in their paperwork. However, rather than being swayed by her willingness to cooperate, I observed that the officials grew progressively uneasy with Kelly's proficiency. She was too knowledgeable about correct citation protocols, posed too many sharp questions concerning their scope of authority, and showed a level of familiarity with governmental procedures that was well beyond what they anticipated from a rancher's wife. By the time they concluded, Candace's sense of triumph was palpable, but so was her exasperation that Kelly had not displayed the emotional collapse she had evidently anticipated. "This is not finished," Candace declared as her contingent readied to depart, her tone filled with the kind of spiteful satisfaction that arises from the belief that you have just ruined someone's life. "These infractions will be forwarded to all pertinent agencies. You are given 15 days to remedy them all or be subject to substantial penalties and potential legal proceedings." Kelly's reply was issued with the same composed professionalism she had shown throughout the entire review. "We are fully aware, Mrs. Monroe. We will go over everything with our lawyer and reply via the proper legal avenues." The reference to legal counsel caused Candace's eye to twitch, but she kept her smile as she returned to her official procession, evidently convinced she had secured a significant win in her private war against my wife. That evening, as Kelly was arranging the day's paperwork with her characteristic systematic care, I at last found the resolve to pose the question that had been troubling me since the morning's events. "Kelly, what was your actual role in the Navy? And please don't just say training. I need the complete story." She glanced up from her documents, and for a brief second, I detected a hint of vulnerability in her look, as if she were contemplating whether to entrust me with details she had guarded for years. "I was an instructor for the Navy SEALs, Brad. To be precise, I prepared individuals for high-stakes missions where any mistake could be fatal. Water survival, combat swimming, tactical response. If anyone needed to learn how to survive in dire situations, they were sent to me." The nonchalant way she stated it struck me with the force of a physical impact, completely altering my understanding of the woman I had married. "You were a trainer for Navy SEALs," I echoed, struggling to grasp what I was hearing. "Honey, why did you never tell me?" Kelly's laugh was tinged with sorrow, reflecting years of explaining herself to those who couldn't comprehend the gravity of her past duties. "Because most people hear Navy SEAL and assume I'm either embellishing or some sort of Amazonian warrior. The reality is more nuanced. I was an instructor, not an active combatant. But yes, I did train some of the world's most elite soldiers to navigate impossible circumstances." Suddenly, every aspect of my wife's conduct over the preceding weeks fell into perfect place. The composure under duress, the methodical record-keeping, the way she seemed to approach every challenge as a tactical issue demanding careful strategy and impeccable follow-through. "So when you washed out Rachel Monroe," I started, and Kelly concluded the sentence with the kind of straightforwardness that arises from repeatedly revisiting a hard choice. "I made a decision that likely saved her life, as well as the lives of future trainees. She violated critical safety measures during a nighttime water drill. In actual combat scenarios, that type of carelessness leads to fatalities." Kelly took out her phone and displayed a photograph I had not seen before. It was a group picture of military members in training attire, which included a younger Kelly in an instructor's uniform, positioned next to a young woman who bore a striking resemblance to a 20-something Candace. "That is Rachel," she explained, indicating the young woman whose expression had the same resolute force I had come to associate with her sister. This was captured 2 days prior to the event that terminated her military path and made me a lasting adversary of the Monroe family. Before I could fully grasp the weight of all that Kelly had just shared, our home phone rang with the sharp, electronic sound that always seemed to foreshadow problems. The caller ID displayed an unfamiliar number, but Kelly picked up with her customary polite tone, which concealed the professional vigilance I was only just starting to grasp. "Hayes Residence." I observed her expression alter as she listened to the person on the line, her face shifting from polite to sharply focused. "I apologize. Could you please say that again?" she asked, her voice acquiring a sharpness that hinted the call had entered a perilous phase. "You're claiming a complaint has been filed about what, specifically?" I moved in closer to overhear parts of the call, picking up on official-sounding phrases like domestic disturbance and welfare check that made my stomach clench with the knowledge that Candace had just taken our dispute to a completely new and dangerous level. Kelly remained silent for a considerable time, absorbing information that was evidently far more grave than typical bureaucratic interference. Then she spoke. "Officer, I can assure you there is no emergency at this location. My husband and I are by ourselves, and there has been no altercation of any sort." But it seemed the person on the phone was not content with that response, as Kelly's subsequent words confirmed my deepest concerns about the direction this was taking. "Yes, sir, we will be waiting, but I must state for the record that this is a baseless accusation." She ended the call and looked at me with a face that showed both anger and something more, a kind of readiness, as though she had foreseen this very escalation and was ready for it. "Let me take a guess," I said, the familiar tension of combat stress beginning to form in my stomach. "Candace reported us to the police." Kelly confirmed with a nod, but her expression suggested this was not the catastrophe I imagined. "An anonymous call regarding domestic abuse. They are dispatching an officer to perform a welfare check." Brad, this move is precisely what I anticipated from her. When official channels fail, individuals like Candace turn to the police. The real question is, what is her ultimate goal? As we detected the sound of a police cruiser entering our driveway, I knew that our tranquil ranch life was about to become the setting for a showdown that would put to the test everything Kelly had learned in her years of preparing people to survive in situations where one wrong move could have fatal consequences. Officer Rick Daniels fit the description of a small-town policeman perfectly, as if he had been sent straight from Central Casting. He was in his mid-40s, a bit on the heavy side, with a mustache that implied he held his position with great esteem. Yet, there was an expression in his eyes as Kelly answered the door that set off alarms in my marine-trained mind. He was not handling this as a standard welfare check. His hand was positioned on his firearm, his posture was guarded, and he was eyeing my wife as if she were a prospective adversary rather than a potential person in distress. "Ma'am," he began, his tone filled with the kind of official strain that police officers adopt when they anticipate a problem. "I'm Officer Daniels from the County Sheriff's Department. We've had a call about a domestic incident at this location." Kelly's reply was both prompt and flawless. She appeared concerned yet cooperative, anxious but not defensive. "Officer, I'm uncertain what you're referring to by a domestic incident. My husband and I have been at home the entire evening, and we have had no disagreements or issues." But Daniels remained skeptical. He continued to survey our property as though searching for confirmation of something in particular, and I saw his eyes pause on our barn, where Kelly stored her exercise gear. "Ma'am, the person who called suggested there could be safety issues related to weapons or training equipment on the premises." At that moment, I understood that Candace had provided him with a highly detailed account, because Daniels was clearly anticipating the discovery of something of a military nature that would validate his palpable mistrust. Kelly remained composed. Her answer was designed to be cooperative without appearing defensive. "Officer, my husband is a veteran of the armed forces, and I conduct some personal training sessions. We possess standard exercise gear, all of which is legally owned and securely kept. Would you care to inspect our permits?" The poised manner in which she presented the documents, without any sign of defensiveness, ought to have put any sensible officer at ease, but Daniels seemed to grow more agitated by her cooperation rather than less so. As we proceeded towards the barn, Kelly kept up a continuous stream of remarks that showed a familiarity with police protocols that both took me by surprise and visibly unnerved Daniels. "Of course, officer. I should also inform you that we have surveillance cameras recording this exchange for security reasons, and I am prepared to give you the contact details for our lawyer if necessary." Most people would have navigated such a scenario with a mix of apprehension and bewildered inquiries, but Kelly was managing it as if she had experienced police encounters before many of them. When Daniels saw the interior of our converted barn, his attitude shifted from doubtful to openly antagonistic, and I understood that Candace's narrative had conditioned him to perceive dangers where there were none. It contained standard exercise equipment, a few old textbooks, nothing alarming unless you knew their true purpose. But Daniels was interpreting the scene through the filter of whatever tale Candace had spun for him, imagining military-grade training where Kelly simply saw fitness apparatus and professional references. "Ma'am, this appears to be equipment for tactical training. Are you running any form of military or combat instruction on these premises?" Kelly's response was factually correct, yet deliberately vague. "I offer one-on-one fitness instruction, sir. All the items you see here are common equipment that can be bought at any retailer of sporting goods." However, I could sense that Daniels was taking her composed proficiency as a sign of dishonesty rather than helpfulness. His own mistrust was intensifying, leading him to the conclusion that my wife was concealing something dangerous. It was at that point that the situation took a disastrous turn for the worse. Daniels noticed Kelly's collection of training textbooks on a shelf, volumes on water survival, tactical fitness, and emergency preparedness that she had gathered during her time in the Navy. And something in his reasoning seemed to break. "Ma'am, I will require you to move away from the equipment and ensure your hands are in plain sight." His tone had adopted the stern quality that police officers use when they have determined someone poses a threat, and I could feel my own training take over as I saw the indicators of a situation on the brink of escalating dangerously. Kelly complied at once, lifting her hands slightly and moving back, but her actions were too fluid, too assured. Rather than appearing like a frightened civilian, she resembled someone who had been instructed to follow commands from armed authorities without showing fear or uncertainty. "Officer," she stated, her voice still composed, but with a newfound authoritativeness, "my hands are clearly visible, and I am following your directions. Could you please specify the particular safety risk you are addressing?" The inquiry was entirely justified, stated in a manner that conveyed a sincere wish to be helpful, but it seemed to push Daniels beyond some unseen limit. Perhaps it was Kelly's unnerving composure, or the way she was evidently more at ease in the situation than he was. Or maybe Candace had depicted an even more menacing scenario than I had imagined. "Ma'am, I need you to place your hands on your head and move away from all equipment immediately." When Kelly followed the order without hesitation, her movements marked by the kind of practiced ease that comes from years of obeying commands under duress, Daniels made a critical error. He unholstered his firearm. "Keep your hands where they're visible," he yelled, his weapon aimed squarely at my wife's head. In that instant, everything shifted. Not only the circumstances, which had escalated from a simple check to a potential catastrophe in a matter of seconds, but Kelly herself. The woman standing in our barn with a gun pointed at her was not the fitness coach and rancher's wife I was married to. She had become someone else completely. Someone who regarded an armed officer as a professional might view a technical issue needing a careful resolution rather than an emotional outburst. "Officer," Kelly said, her voice perfectly calm despite the weapon aimed at her, "my hands are in plain sight, and I am not approaching any equipment. You are currently not following standard de-escalation protocols, and I require you to state the specific danger you are addressing." The way she spoke, not with pleading or fear, but with a professional critique of his methods, should have been comforting proof that she was not a danger. Instead, it seemed to frighten Daniels even more, because he was confronted with a woman who understood police tactics better than he did, who was evaluating his actions while he held her at gunpoint. I began to step towards them, but Kelly gave me a look that made me freeze. It was a glance that communicated, "I am in control of this," in a manner that suggested she had faced similar situations before and knew precisely how to de-escalate an armed standoff without any casualties. "Brad," she said, her eyes fixed on Daniels, "please remain where you are and avoid any quick gestures. Officer Daniels will soon grasp that he has made a procedural mistake, and we aim to assist him in rectifying it without incident." The assurance in her voice was unwavering, and I finally grasped why Kelly had remained so composed throughout all of Candace's provocations. This was not her first encounter with a dangerous situation, and it likely wasn't even the most perilous one she had ever confronted. As I observed my wife expertly handle a scenario that should have been horrifying, I came to the conclusion that Candace Monroe had just committed an error that would alter the entire dynamic. She had compelled Kelly to show abilities and knowledge that my wife had been happy to keep under wraps. And based on the professional, skilled, and fearless way Kelly was dealing with Officer Daniels, Candace had initiated a conflict with an individual trained to prevail in disputes far more critical than those involving HOA rules. The events following the gun incident were a masterclass in handling a crisis. While Officer Daniels stood there, visibly shaken and no doubt aware he had made a mistake that could jeopardize his career, Kelly transitioned into a completely professional state. She meticulously recorded every detail: his badge number, the patrol vehicle number, the time of the event, and the precise order of what had happened. Her manner was courteous but exacting, and it was evident that this was not her first experience lodging a formal complaint against a police officer. "Officer Daniels," she began, her voice retaining that strangely placid quality, "I realize you were acting on a report, but to draw your firearm on a civilian who is unarmed and compliant necessitates a clear reason under departmental rules. I will need you to explain the immediate danger you saw that justified the use of lethal force." Daniels mumbled something about questionable gear and possible arms, but Kelly's inquiries systematically revealed the flaws in his reasoning. What truly struck me was Kelly's ability to control the situation without making it worse. She could have expressed anger, made legal threats, or made Daniels feel the fool he had just shown himself to be. Instead, she approached it as if it were a training scenario, guiding him through the correct protocols for de-escalation and helping him see where his actions had been wrong. "Officer, in performing a welfare check, department regulations generally mandate that you confirm specific dangers before you draw your weapon. Exercise equipment and instructional books are not considered an immediate threat by standard procedure. By the time Daniels departed from our land, he had the appearance of someone who knew he had just narrowly avoided a career-ending blunder. And Kelly had secured an official incident report detailing every aspect of his professional error. As his police car vanished down our driveway, I looked at my wife with a renewed sense of admiration and a multitude of questions. "Kelly, where did you acquire the skill to deal with police officers in that manner?" She paused for a moment, arranging her papers with the same systematic care she had shown in all aspects of this ordeal. "Brad, I need to share something about my time in the Navy that I have not previously discussed." She glanced at me with a look that was a mix of apology and relief. I was not simply a fitness coach who worked with service members. I was a tactical trainer for the Navy SEALs. For a period of 8 years, I readied special operations units for missions where flawless execution was critical to survival. The word struck me with the force of a physical blow. A tactical trainer for the Navy SEALs. That single fact explained everything. Her composure under duress, her methodical handling of conflict, the way she seemed to dissect every challenge as if it were a military strategy. "You were a trainer for Navy SEALs?" I asked again, trying to make sense of what I was hearing. "Honey, why did you never tell me?" Kelly's laugh was tinged with sorrow. "Because most people hear Navy SEAL and assume I'm either embellishing or some sort of Amazonian warrior. The reality is more nuanced. I was an instructor, not an active combatant. But yes, I did train some of the world's most elite soldiers to navigate impossible circumstances, including Rachel Monroe," I stated, and Kelly gave a nod. Rachel was enrolled in one of my high-level water survival programs. She was skilled but incautious. During a nighttime drill, she violated safety measures that could have resulted in her training partner's death. When an individual demonstrates an inability to adhere to life and death regulations, they are not permitted to proceed with special operations training. Kelly took out her phone and displayed a photograph I had not seen before. It was a group picture of military members in training attire, which included a younger Kelly in an instructor's uniform and a young woman who bore a striking resemblance to a 20-something Candace. "That is Rachel," she explained, indicating the young woman, and this was captured 2 days prior to the event that terminated her military path. Observing the picture, I could detect both the family likeness and the resolute look that Rachel had in common with her sister. "So when Candace identified you, she saw the individual who shattered her sister's aspirations," Kelly concluded. "And she has been plotting her retaliation ever since." Kelly put her phone away and turned to me, facing me directly. "Brad, there is another detail you should be aware of. My designation during that time was Ghost. It wasn't because I was stealthy, but because I was known for resolving issues with quiet efficiency." The way she said it sent a shiver down my spine, not out of fear of my wife, but from the sudden realization that Candace Monroe had initiated a conflict with someone professionally equipped to win. "So, what is the next step?" I inquired. Kelly's smile was slight, yet filled with absolute assurance. "Now, Candace has moved this beyond simple harassment to involving the police under deceptive claims. She has also led a police officer to engage in professional misconduct that could ruin his career. This fundamentally alters the terms of engagement." Over the subsequent 3 days, I observed Kelly convert our dining area into what resembled a military operations center. She had displayed maps of our local area, charts detailing Candace's harassment, duplicates of every paper and picture from the preceding 2 months, and what seemed to be comprehensive psychological assessments of all individuals involved in the matter. "Kelly," I remarked, examining the wall of documentation she had put together, "it appears as though you're strategizing for an invasion." She glanced up from her computer, where she was composing what seemed to be a formal document. "Not an invasion, my dear. It's a methodical settlement of the dispute, employing suitable tactical measures." She pointed to her display of evidence. "Candace has been waging a campaign of harassment with bureaucratic tools, city inspections, and false police claims. She has advanced to involving the police under deceptive pretenses, which is a serious crime in this state. Now, I will counter with proportional force." "Proportional force?" I inquired, and Kelly's smile took on a predatory quality. "Documentation, legal proceedings, and public disclosure of her pattern of harassment. Candace believes she has been contending with a defenseless rancher's wife. It is time she was introduced to the Ghost." She angled her laptop screen towards me, revealing what was evidently a detailed account of every exchange we had with Candace, complete with images, testimony from witnesses, and a legal assessment. "This will be sent to the county sheriff's office, the state prosecutor's office, and the HOA board all at once. By tomorrow morning, everyone will be fully aware of what Candace Monroe has been up to and her motives. As I reviewed Kelly's document, I understood that my wife had been getting ready for this moment since our very first meeting with Candace. Every piece of paper, every picture, every meticulously noted exchange had been part of building this thorough case that no one could possibly overlook or set aside. Candace had dedicated months to constructing a case against us, but Kelly had been assembling a superior case against Candace all along. And from the evidence presented on our dining room wall, our HOA president was on the verge of learning that she had been outmaneuvered from the very start. The following morning delivered a form of fitting retribution that one typically only finds in films. Kelly's detailed report reached all the appropriate authorities at the same time: the sheriff's department, the state attorney, the HOA board, and the city council, executed like a synchronized military operation. Within 2 hours, our phone began to ring with calls from officials who were now eager to hear our version of events. The timing was impeccable, as on that very day, Candace launched her final, desperate maneuver. She applied for an immediate restraining order against both Kelly and myself, alleging that we had been stalking and intimidating her. The irony was exquisite. Here was a woman who had dedicated months to monitoring our property, lodging baseless complaints, and manipulating the police, now asserting that we were the ones guilty of harassment. The court date was set for 2 p.m. on the same day, affording Kelly a mere 4 hours to get her case ready. I volunteered to assist, but she simply grinned and remarked, "Honey, I've been getting ready for this since the day Candace first appeared at our gate." She dedicated the morning to arranging her proof into what resembled a professional presentation kit, featuring photos, timeline graphics, and legal papers that would have commanded the respect of a Pentagon analyst. When I inquired about where she had acquired the skills to put together legal arguments of this caliber, Kelly's response was typically straightforward. When your duty involves preparing individuals for life or death scenarios, documenting everything becomes second nature. In the world of special operations, if you cannot substantiate what occurred, lives are at stake. The courtroom proceedings provided all the dramatic satisfaction I could have wished for. Candace showed up with falsified proof and a level of self-assurance that indicated she believed the outcome was already in her favor. She was attired as if she were on her way to a meeting at a private club, complete with a string of pearls and a smile that lacked genuine warmth. When the judge announced Kelly's name and my wife rose to make her statement, the change was instantaneous and total. This was not the rancher's wife who prepared my coffee each morning. This was Ghost, the tactical expert who had spent years delivering presentations where the stakes were life and death. Kelly's argument was a brilliant exercise in systematic dismantling. She started with a chronological account of Candace's campaign of harassment from its inception, backing it up with photos and official papers that demonstrated both premeditation and a pattern of escalation. She showed the police body camera video, which vividly depicted Officer Daniels drawing his firearm without any valid reason. She also presented statements from other people Candace had previously targeted, families who had been forced out of the neighborhood due to similar campaigns of intimidation. But the decisive moment that sealed Candace's downfall was when Kelly played the audio file of Candace's phone call. "I've located her," Candace's voice echoed distinctly through the courtroom. "The person who ruined Rachel's future. Now it's my turn to ruin hers." The judges looked transformed from one of professional curiosity to outright revulsion as the recording played on, showing Candace admitting that her entire harassment campaign was driven by a personal vendetta rather than valid HOA matters. When the recording concluded, the courtroom fell silent, broken only by the sound of Candace's sharp gasp as she understood her own words had just annihilated any shred of credibility she possessed. Kelly's closing remarks were delivered with the kind of composed assurance that is honed over years of making high-stakes decisions under duress. "Your Honor, Mrs. Monroe has conducted a methodical campaign of harassment fueled by a personal vendetta, which escalated to the point of filing false police reports that led to a firearm being aimed at an unarmed citizen. This is not a matter for the HOA. This is stalking, harassment, and a misuse of the legal system." The judge's decision was both immediate and thorough. Not only was Candace's request for a restraining order rejected, but a restraining order was granted against her, prohibiting her from coming near our property or making any contact with us. Officer Daniels was placed on leave while an investigation was pending. Candace was ousted from her role in the HOA and prohibited from holding any community leadership positions. Most gratifyingly, the judge mandated that Candace cover our legal fees and levied substantial penalties on her for submitting false claims. The outcome was everything we could have wished for. The HOA board issued a public apology and asked Kelly to step in as the temporary president. Kelly's initial official decision was to amend the community regulations, doing away with the arbitrary rules that had been used to target residents. Within a single month, Candace and her husband had discreetly left the area, unable to confront the community that was now fully aware of her true nature. Following a departmental inquiry that verified he had breached numerous regulations, Officer Daniels was permanently moved to a desk job. The town newspaper published a piece on HOA misconduct, highlighting our situation as a case study for how residents can effectively resist such harassment. 6 months down the line, as I observe Kelly instructing a self-defense workshop for the women of our town, I can't help but feel a sense of satisfaction at how perfectly things resolved. Candace had dedicated months to her attempt to ruin the life of what she perceived as a simple rancher's wife who had done a disservice to her family. In reality, however, she had been going after Ghost, a seasoned professional who had devoted years to preparing individuals to handle situations far more critical than suburban HOA disagreements. Kelly is now able to fully embrace who she is, applying her abilities to benefit our community rather than keeping them concealed. She has initiated a support network for veterans, provides instruction in tactical fitness, and has emerged as the type of leader that people genuinely wish to emulate, not to be intimidated by. Our ranch has evolved into a central point for the local area, hosting cookouts and workshops that unite people rather than separating them. When I'm asked about our troubles with the HOA, I consistently conclude my account in the same manner. At times, the most effective form of retribution isn't about retaliation, it's about growing into the person you are truly meant to be. And occasionally, justice simply requires a bit of assistance from someone who understands the proper way to engage in a conflict. Candace Monroe believed she was pursuing a defenseless target, but she had in fact cornered a skilled warrior who was merely seeking a quiet existence. The lesson of this story is straightforward. Exercise great caution in choosing your battles, for you can never be certain when that unassuming neighbor might prove to be someone trained to prevail in conflicts of far greater consequence than HOA infractions.